Well, good evening, all you beautiful people. I will be your host and your IT guy this evening. All right, so here we are, Daniel. We're a little kind of goofed up because we say it's session 9, but it's chapter 8. And how you like that one for a graphic? I'm the peach color kind of, I don't know about that, but there you go. So here we are heading into this, the ram and the goat. Now we used this slide before, and I like this one because it gives us a couple pieces of information. Historically speaking, we went through 1, 2, 3, and 4. Things, they happen, we understand them, they talk about the future, they talk about current things that happen. When we shift, remember the red outline, that was Aramaic. So all of those were in that language. And remember I said if we did it chronologically, it would be flipped a little bit. So as we go through these, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 would have fit back over on the other side. So that's how we're looking at that. And tonight, you notice we're outside of that red. So that means we're back to Hebrew. So when we see that, we're looking at the ram and the goat. Now, when we're looking at this, you've got to notice that the emphasis here is on the second and the third kingdoms. And we're going to bring that up. So if it was a statue, then we'd be looking at silver and bronze. If it was the one we looked at last week, it would be the bear and the leopard. So as we're looking at the kingdoms, this is the one we're going to bring it up. And I'm telling you that in advance because you're going to see it as we're going through it anyway, so there's no shock there. But when you look at this, you've got to look at these language differences. When it was in Aramaic, it was from a Gentile point of view. All of those things would have been from a Gentile point of view. When you come down here to the ram and the goat, now you're going to see how what's happening here actually affects Israel. So now that's why the language changed. It's giving you kind of a hint. The reason I'm speaking, like if I was using, say, French and German today, it's like, oh, he's speaking French again. This has got to be something pertaining to France. If I was speaking German, you'd say, oh, look, it's something about Germany. And that's what's happening here. So you're seeing how this connection you're going to see. Remember, it's the same pieces. It's still the same two kingdoms, Persia and Greece, but yet it's how did they affect them? One's from one perspective and the other's from the other perspective. So as we run through this, here's a little bit of an outline here. 1 through 8, we're going to be talking about Alexander the Great. And then 20 through 22 is the interpretation of those. And then we see 9 through 14 is going to be a guy called Antiochus Epiphanes. I don't know what it would be like to go to a school with a name like that. 23 to 25 now we're going to see shadows of the Antichrist. The reason I'm kind of giving you this outline right here is because this is going to be really straightforward. This is not going to be any kind of hard to understand. This is going to be scripture that's laid out and then very quickly giving you the interpretation right behind it. This one doesn't have a whole lot of, what am I looking for? It's interpreting, but it's actually just defining it, saying, let's look at some background because it's going to start laying it out for you. It's interesting that way. These are the guys. So as complicated as that may be, all I did was make a slide that has taken up all of the things that we've done so far. They're all the same. If I would have put my pictures in here, those guys right there, then you'd kind of have an idea. So you can kind of see if God is continually laying down this information from this perspective, now he's going to lay it down from this perspective. Now tonight we're going to look at another perspective, but it's all the same. That's got to be some important information. It's got to be some important information. There's another thing that we were talking about a while back, and it was called the law of double reference. And it's here's an example, when we were going through Isaiah 14, you see that there's a guy that says, I will ascend, I will. And if you notice, when you start reading that, the guy is talking about the king of Tyre. So you're going, well, that's a man. That's the king of Tyre. How could that be Satan? But then you start looking through it, and you go, well, the stuff that he's talking about, a man couldn't have done. It's a law of double reference. When verses will come out like that, you're going to see that there's a couple of different ways that these things can be applied. You're going to see one in this one tonight. You're going to read it, and it's talking specifically about this one man, but there's a whole lot of things that he's doing that are going to apply to a different guy. So keep that. That's your puzzle for the evening. Okay. All right. So let's head into it. We're going to go Daniel, chapter 8, verse 1. In the 3rd year of the reign of King Belshazzar, a vision appeared to me, Daniel. Notice how he's pointing that out? All the dreams up until now, they weren't his. Notice that? This king, that king, they always had dreams. This time he goes to me, Daniel. After the one that appeared to me the first time. Oh, this ain't the only one. I saw in the vision, and it so happened while I was looking, that I was in Shushan, the citadel, which is in the province of Elam. I saw in the vision that I was by the river Ulai. Now, when you see these things in here, another thing to know about reading your Bible, when you see names, they are going to be named whatever the original name was. If I told you St. Petersburg, you'd say Russia, because you're familiar with that one. If I said, where's Leningrad? That is St. Petersburg. They changed the name. So there are things that go back times. For example, there's times that we're going to read the Bible about a group called the Scythians. The Scythians were the predecessors to the Russians. So there are things when they use the old name, it's not just because they're talking about that group, they're talking about whatever was in that line. So whatever Redlands might have been called before Redlands, you know, like here's one, Cape Kennedy, right? And Cape Canaveral. They changed the name. Constantinople, what is it now? Istanbul. So if we were to say, come on everybody, let's go to Constantinople, everybody would go, I can't get a plane there. They don't exist. But if we said Istanbul, we go, oh, that's in Turkey. So these names that they're using, pick up on them, and there's a couple of them in here. Elam are the Syrians, and they're in this area here, they were Persians. Who are the Persians today? Close. Real close. Go east. They don't like us real good right now. Iran. So here we go with the Persians. And I always thought that was kind of funny how that happens. In the 3rd year, this is 51 BC. I'm sorry, it's Daniel's age. I had a note here for something else. Daniel's age in here is definitely not 51 BC. Daniel's age was that he was up in his 80s by now. Remember how we were going through that? When you hear things about the age of these guys, it's almost like they were the Energizer bunnies. You know, I mean, here he is, 83 years old. He's been through a couple of different leaders. He's been through a couple of different empires, and he just keeps on trucking. One of the things that we're going to point out from this one is that it says that a vision appeared to me. There's really some opinions here. There's no concrete way to say either way, but I'll give you what the two of them are. One of them, you guys have heard of Josephus. Josephus actually believes that he was actually there in this vision. Like John was translated to Revelation. You know, in the book of Revelation, he was translated to the future, to heaven, to in that spot. Well, Josephus and some other guys, they actually said, no, he's actually there. God translated him. In this vision, he went to this Shushan. Other people, and I've got a list of these guys, and John Calvin's one of them, you've heard of his name, he says no, that was just a vision. It was just a vision. He went nowhere. God gave him all this information. Whatever you're going to do with that, there you go. But how do we process that for today? I don't know. Maybe you're going to end up with a dream. Will you be translated? Will you come back? Sometimes I think to myself when I talk to folks that said they had dreams, and one of the first things they say is they go, it was real. I can't say that you weren't translated in the spirit to whatever that was. I don't know. But good way to look at it. Okay, this place, the Shushan Palace. Susa was one of the Persian royal cities, and it was located about 230 miles east of Babylon. I should have had a map so you could kind of get an idea of this, but 200 miles east of Babylon, and it was 150 miles north of the head of the Persian Gulf. Okay, so now we're starting to see Kuwait, right? Because that's just about in the middle of Kuwait. That'd be a good way to describe it. Now, it was the capital of these ancient Elamites, all right? Later, it was the main residence of the Persian kings. This is where they set up their home. This is where they said this is going to be it, kind of like the Vatican might be, or Washington, D.C. might be. This famous palace here was started by Darius the First. Now we know who that is, because when the writing was on the wall and Cyrus conquered them, Darius was the one that was in charge of what was going on at the time. So he's the one that set this up. Later on, it was enlarged and made bigger, this palace. It became this huge place, this big campus or complex, by Xerxes. And I know it's terrible to keep using, a worldly movie, but in 300, remember the big ugly guy with all the hardware hanging on his face? That was Xerxes. So that's the guy that made it bigger. That's the guy that really cemented that in. It happened also to be the home of a really cool lady named Esther. So this is when you read Esther. This is where she lived right there. It was also near the city of Nineveh. So there's a lot going on in this place, so you can kind of see why God's bringing him there, because he's in the capital of the Gentiles. Whether it's vision or real, whatever, this is what he's seeing. Nehemiah? Yeah, city of Nehemiah too, yep. Nehemiah was a prophet in the Old Testament. But when you read his story, he's based somewhere. That's where he's based. Yep, absolutely. Exactly the same. Yep. All right, so verse 3. Then I lifted my eyes and saw, and there, standing beside the river, was a ram, which had 2 horns, and the 2 horns were high, but one was higher than the other, and the higher one came up last. I saw the ram pushing westward, northward, and southward, so that no animal could withstand him, nor was there any that could deliver from his hand. But he did according to his will and became great. Okay? I've got goats. So, and it's funny, you guys are going to laugh, but I was just read through this so quickly, I was just like, yeah, right, lamb, goat, whatever, same thing, let's keep going. Well, as I'm going through this, obviously a ram is bigger, stout. I mean, it's a 4-wheel drive truck. I mean, a goat is a normal truck. So, obviously, you're looking at these things going, okay, this ram's huge. This one's got 2 horns, but unequal. Trust me, when they're born and they grow, one doesn't grow faster or longer than the other. So this is definitely something going on. One horn was longer than the other. The horns did not rise simultaneously. The longer one arose after or grew up later than the shorter one. Timeline. You're thinking of time now. So these 2 horns here, remember they were Medo-Persian. So there were some Medes and there were some Persians that had, when they mixed, remember that's what Cyrus was dealing with. We went over his background on who he was. Now, between these 2 horns here, this kind of recalls us back to the bear that was raised up on one side in the last chapter. See, in that, the ram had been standing there by the canal to charge everywhere. He had certain battles that they had done. That's what we were talking about with that bear. What had conquered? What was it they had conquered? There were certain cities that were there. And just like the bear, his charge was irresistible. Nobody could escape that bear. He moved slow, but when he got there, he took care of business. That's what this ram is, same thing. So, one empire. It's not 2 empires, it's one empire. We're talking about 2 major leaders.
This is the Greek Empire.
This one is Persian.
Because he's coming from the east.
Coming from the east, because that's the only way he didn't go. Exactly. So you see how the way the word's laid out, if you just read it in there and you go, he went this way, and this way, he didn't go this way, that means he's heading that way, that means he's coming from this direction, east. Well, you're heading into that, and you'll see him. The ones that made the most effect, because now that we're talking Hebrew again, what are the ones that made the most effect on Israel? So now we're starting to look at these guys and we're going, oh wow, these guys had an effect on them. Okay, well there's 2 horns right here. So when we look through them, we go, okay, well who's the guys? Well, the one horn that came up, Cyrus, he was conquering, he was moving in, he was just taking care of business. But then some time goes by and Xerxes shows up. Remember, the guy from the movie. So Xerxes shows up. Those are the 2 Persian leaders that sticks out more than any other. Okay. Xerxes being much more grand, much more powerful than the other one was, than Cyrus was. Here's the ram. Another reason to look at why did they pick that. The ram, he's the guardian spirit of the Persian kingdom. Now you can kind of see why it's used. If you were Daniel and you had this dream and you saw a ram, and I'm trying to think of something that we might use. I was trying to use some kind of a sports team. If I gave you a certain sports figure, the first thing that would pop in your head is, oh, it's that team. So when he sees ram, he knows that's what he's talking about, is this group of people. So this guardian spirit of the Persian kingdom, that's why it was popular, was a ram. And it had clean feet and it had sharp pointed horns. The Persian king, at the head of the army, he was always at the head of the army, and he wore the head of a ram instead of a crown. A diadem is a crown. So he is out there leading with this big ram's head on his head. You can kind of see that. I mean, that's intimidating. And it almost makes me wonder when we talk military things, do you notice that we do it in reverse? We stick all of the people that are not high ranking in the back. Everything we were just watching, we just watched a movie, and I can't remember what it was, King Arthur. Arthur, he was up front. This guy right here, oh, he's up front. He said, we're going to go do it. King David, Saul, why did they rise up like that? They were out there. They were fighting. They weren't in the back being strategists. They were up front saying, let's get to this. Different group of people, different thinking. Anyways, so he wore this thing. Now, even in the zodiac, Aries is the ram, and it links to Persia. So we can see that this ram thing makes a difference. Now, this second guy, the last great ruler of Persia, is Xerxes. So we're back to that big dude. And I kind of like the way they did that because he's a bad guy. And as long as he's a bad guy, I might as well make him look like it. So in that movie, there's Xerxes, the last great ruler of Persia. He was the king during the days of Esther, and he was very erratic. He was very just fly off the handle and chop their heads off, or whatever it was. He made attack against Europe, including against Greece. Now here's where we start seeing the Greece picture. He traveled with 300,000 men and their families. That is a road trip. He leaves, remember their main home plate here is up in Iran, in Syria area. They left that Middle East and they made their way all the way down to Greece. They're on their way to Europe. They're just stomping people and taking names. And who's he taking with him? 300,000 men. You got to figure, what kind of a logistic nightmare would that be? I got to feed them. I got to take care of them. I got to protect them from things that are going on. We got women and children that are going along. And I thought that was odd. But it was almost like a life journey. Because when you go, come on, honey, we're married and we're hitting the road. And we're having kids along the way as we're going, as we're taking over kingdoms. So, now the Greeks, they're smart. They're strategists. They're people that think. They didn't go out and meet them knowing that they were coming in. Now there's two things you've got to remember about the history. And have you guys seen the previews for that second one of that movie, 300? I haven't seen them. I hope it's the next battle. Remember how many people saw it? Did you guys see it?
First one?
The first one.
I did see the first
Okay. When you saw them coming in, the whole story about 300 was because there was 300 Spartans. That was the Navy SEALs of the Greeks. They went out there and they said, we're going. The Akkadians, very old culture. Remember, they went and they go, hey, we're out of here. And they left. Well, those 300, it was a great movie. Those 300, they're dead. They died there. One got away to go tell them. Now, the second time, because he's still rolling in. He's still coming down when he won that. Here's where the Greeks were smart. They didn't go out to meet him. Okay? What they did, they waited until he got to Thermopylae. And in Thermopylae, there was a narrow pass which he couldn't fit that big old army through there. So, when it basically came down to it, one Greek soldier was equal to 10 of these Medo-Persians because they weren't trained, they weren't disciplined army, their family was with them. They weren't Spartans. They weren't that kind of, battle kind of mentality. So, when they get there, they wasted them at Thermopylae. Destroyed them. Their ships were involved in a big case of it. So, as this is coming down, when the word gets back to him that his fleet was destroyed by a storm in Salamis, Xerxes went down to the sea, took off his belt, and he started beating the waves with his belt because the waves had destroyed his fleet. This is the guy. This is the guy that Esther was with. This is the guy that's not thinking clear. Okay? So now let me move on a little bit here. Here's 5. And I was considering, suddenly a male goat came from the west along the surface of the whole earth without touching the ground, and the goat had a notable horn between his eyes. There's a whole lot to know about this guy. He's not touching the ground. He's moving so fast, he's not even touching the ground. A he-goat, some of your translations might say. The he-goat is the buck. This is the alpha male of the group, coming from the west. And he had a powerful single horn that arose suddenly. Okay? This is, who do you think this is? Greece. Who's the leader? Alexander. This is Alexander. So, his speed was so great, his feet didn't even touch the ground. So now, let's take a look at Alexander for a second. At the age of 20, he assumed the mantle. He assumed the power from his father, Philip of Macedon. Again, a movie. It was Alexander the Great. I'm trying to think of who was in the movie, but in the story, they had at least these points correct. I don't follow movies for accuracy, but they had this correct. 6 years after that, at 20 he assumed it. 6 years later, he conquered the entire Persian Empire. 26 years old. He barely took the power at 20. At the age of 30, his empire stretched from the Mediterranean to the Hindu Kush. They were in India. That's fast. That's really fast. In 10 years from taking power, 10 years later, you've conquered Persia. This is Xerxes we're talking about. And he just walked right through him. And it ended up getting all the way to India. He died at the age of 32. His legacies was a new Achilles, one of the soldiers that were there, and a new world order, because he was training everybody to stay when they conquered something and teach them the language. He wanted everybody to speak Greek. He accomplished it. What is your New Testament written in? Greek. What is the Septuagint of our Old Testament written in? Greek. So he at least accomplished that part of it. Now, Alexander was a visionary conqueror, and I really think that this was a big part of what it was. There are some people that they just kind of go along with whatever happens in life. There's other people that, hey, they're driven for something. This guy was mega driven. This guy wouldn't stop. I mean, he was the kind of guy that said, okay, you can rest for a couple hours and pack up, rearm, we're going for another country to go take over. So he was ruthless when he did this. He was a tyrant. But he was a brilliant military strategist and a court politician. So it wasn't just brute strength, we're going to take that hill. It was also smarts. He could sit down and in a conversation figure out, no, that's not the way this goes, because he was a court educated politician. Alexander's mother was the helicopter mom of helicopter moms. Her name was Olympias. She was the 7th wife of Philip. Now, it's suspected that she had a hand in the assassination of her husband Philip to ensure Alexander would take the place of Philip when he died. Alexander was weak. He was trying to go make friends with everybody. He was trying to go say, well, let's all just get along. Let's just be nice, and here, let's give everybody what they want, so I'll be somebody they like. Well, this woman right here, Olympias, she was having none of it. So she kills him. And back to the movie. That guy was not even cold before they had taken his crown, put it on Alexander, and said, you're the man, drug this guy off, and they said, let's get on with this. So this was a very planned thing. She spread rumors that Alexander was her offspring, but it was of her and a snake. So that's the story. And if you think about it, spreading that kind of stuff in a Greek culture that believed in these mythological things, that could give Alexander a huge psychological advantage to people, because they see how he's moving and how quick everything's going. They're thinking, no, this guy's superhuman. This guy's one of the gods or something. So you can see that mom right there. She was motivated. That puts soccer mom or We used to have those when we raced BMX. Okay, so in verse 6. Then he came to the ram that had 2 horns, which I had seen standing beside the river, and ran at him with furious power. The description of this goat is parallel to that third beast, Daniel 7:6. The leopard with the wings. Both were fast. And the leopard had 4 heads, we're going to see that coming up, where the goat had 4 horns. So you're going to see that this is definitely the same creature here. Okay? Now, the goat, a 1-horned goat, was symbolic for the ancient Macedonians. In the zodiac, Persia, Aries, the ram, and in Greece, Capricorn. So we're kind of looking at some of the stuff Dave was even teaching about the astrology. Capricorn, the goat. Now, if you look at it, caper is goat, and cornu is horn. Capricorn, the single-horned animal. 3 different things happened in these battles. May 1st, 334 BC, Alexander crossed Hellensport with 35,000 troops, and he first met and defeated the Persians at Granicus River. This is the first one that he ran into, and I'd like to see what year that was that he did that, but it was within 6 years, we knew before. So there's your first one. The second one was in November of 333, only a year and a half later, the battle at Issus. That would have been what we're looking at, that was Ephesus. So when we see that, we're up in that area right now. So this battle right here happened, Mediterranean Sea, northeast tip. Darius runs. This was the battle where he had Darius involved, so Darius runs. The third one was October 331, and he finally broke, I'm not even going to try to say that, it's Gaugamela. It's also called Arbela, I can say that one. It's near Nineveh. So these 3 battles, 1, 2, 3, and Persia was out. So Alexander was moving quick. I'd like to know the ages of Darius and the ages of Nebuchadnezzar and the ages, because as these ages are, you're seeing this guy that, as far as I'm concerned, this guy was young. I know he's not a kid, even in our terms, but he was young. All right, so in 7, and I saw him confronting the ram. He was moving with rage against him, attacked the ram, and broke his 2 horns. There was no power in the ram. Stop for a second. Those 3 battles that I just told you, where it says he broke his 2 horns, that would have been the first and the last of those emperors that were inside there. So he destroyed both of them in one of those battles. Okay, so he broke both of his 2 horns. There was no power in the ram to withstand him. Somebody that was taking 300,000 men and their families and conquering people had no power to withstand Alexander. But he cast him down to the ground and trampled him. And there was no one that could deliver the ram from his hand. Previously, nobody could escape from the ram's power. But now, no one can escape from the goat. He was enraged at the Persians for having defeated the Greeks at the Battle of Marathon and at the Battle of Salamis and the Greek cities near Athens. He quickly conquered Asia Minor, Syria, Egypt, Mesopotamia. Within a few years, he had already got them. This guy, he was just moving. He was just flying through on a road trip, conquering people instead of taking trinkets or what do you call them? Souvenirs. He was just conquering kingdoms instead of souvenirs. So, 8. Therefore the male goat grew very great. And when he became strong, the large horn was broken. And in its place of it, 4 notable ones came up toward the 4 winds of heaven. The great horn was broken. Alexander died in 32. Dissipated life, drunken, just a mess. At Babylon is where he died, 11 years after leaving his home country. 11 years from the time he got it to the time he died. As soon as the goat was elevated to great power, his large single horn was broken off, and in its place was taken 4 notable horns. Okay, take a look at this right here. These are comparing those 2 verses, the one tonight and the one last week. Daniel 8:8 says, therefore the male goat grew very great, and when he became strong, the horn was broken, and in place of it 4 notable horns came up towards the 4 winds of heaven. Last week said, after this, I looked, and there was another, like a leopard, which had on its back 4 wings of a bird. The beast had 4 heads, and dominion was given to it. See the comparison of these two? So, just so that you know, these two that you're looking at, it's talking about the same item, same grouping of people, okay? So, these 4 notable horns here. The empire is divided. This is where Alexander's dead, and at his grave, or when he passes away there, before he's actually expired, who do we give this to? You had no kids. You have nobody that you've kind of preened into moving into that leadership spot. And the way that it's told is, he says, give it to the strong. Now, there were more than 4 generals, but those 4, there was actually 5. One of them gets killed off real quick. But the 4 are the ones that we've talked about a bunch. Cassander, Lysimachus, Seleucus, and Ptolemy. Now, the first one, Cassander, he was married to Alexander's sister. Well, that's a nice way to get into the business. He took Macedonia and Greece. Lysimachus, he was one of 2 boyhood tutors that Alexander had. So Alexander was smart enough to know the guys that are smarter than me, I need to keep them close. A good leader is not standing on his own. He will surround himself by very capable people. That's what he's doing here. Seleucus, this was one of Philip's generals, his dad. So these are not young guys like him. These are seasoned. These guys know. He takes Syria, the lands to the east, all the way to India. Ptolemy is a Macedonian noble. He's a boyhood friend and a schoolmate of Alexander. So these guys aren't just somebody he picked at random. He knew what they were capable of, and he knew their hearts. That's why he kept them there. Ptolemy ends up conquering or taking care of Egypt, Cyrene, Arabia, and parts of Asia Minor. That 5th contender there is a guy that was soon defeated, so he wasn't even an issue. They didn't even end up giving anything to him because he'd already died. Now, when you look at this, you always start to see this is where Israel always seems to be right in the way. Israel always seems to be right in the mix of it. This is because God's in control. Everything that is going on, God is dealing with his people, much like he does us. Whatever that happens, it happens because it's Father filtered. There's nothing that happens to us or Israel that wasn't Father filtered. These guys, if you look at it, they just got stuck right in the middle of the vice. That's where they're at. So inside all this, Israel endures being this buffer zone between the struggles between these 2 big guys. Now, out of all of those guys, Seleucus and Ptolemy, they're the big guys. They're the big boys. These guys are always going at it. And it would be like having your house being the battlefield. I mean, your house is there. When these 2 want to go boxing, it's right there in your front yard. So that's what Israel does. Yeah. So Israel's enduring this because they're in this buffer zone between these 2 guys. Now, here's the funny thing. We've always talked about these 400 silent years. And we don't know what happened in those silent years because Malachi stopped writing. And we don't get any more out of this until we hear about John the Baptist. Okay, great. Well, there's 400 years that are missing. So we just kind of write it off. Until you come up to things like this and you're hearing all this stuff that we're talking about, this happened in those 400 silent years. The descriptions that we're being given from 2 and 7 and 11, it's going to come up again. There are the guys that have looked at this and said, there's no way Daniel was written when it was written because it is too accurate. The description of Antiochus, the description of Alexander, the description, remember all these things that he saw about the goat and all the stuff, remember the animals out there? They happened before it happened. The dreams came before. So the book was written before these things happened. So now that we're seeing all this, they're saying there's no way that was written. He had to have written this afterwards, and everybody's just claiming it to be older. Especially this section right here. It's one of them that people use because it is so detailed with accuracy that they're saying there's no way. It's a late date. There's no way it's this one. So as you get the details in here, it's incredible. The areas they conquered and what was happening, and you go, well, yeah, this is like a history book, but Daniel got to write it ahead of time. So 9, out of one of them came a little horn. Remember, so we see back over here in 7 that, or 8 rather, the male grew very great. When he became strong, the large horn was broken, and in the place of it, 4 notable ones came up. Okay, well, out of the 4 of them that came up, out of one of those 4 came a little horn, which grew exceedingly great. Now, the other ones just said great. This one says exceedingly great, toward the south, toward the east, and toward the glorious land. That's interesting. Pretty good description. And it grew up to the host of heaven, and it cast it down, and some of the host and some of the stars to the ground. And it cast down some of the host and some of the stars to the ground and trampled them. Now here's where this double reference starts to come in. How many of you guys right now are, what are you thinking? Give me an idea. Who is this and what time we're talking about? Israel, okay. What about, and it grew up to the host of heaven, and it cast down some of the host and some of the stars to the ground. What do you think? It's interesting. Sounds like Revelation. Sounds like Satan, yeah. But also, yeah, it sounds like a current day thing. So here's where it starts to split. A double reference. And it'll continue here as we go. So here we go with this guy. Notice Daniel is seeing that 4 horns, a little one came up. This is not the same one from 7 as it came up. So you can go back and look at that yourself. When it says pleasant land, it's definitely talking about Israel. Definitely. So I've got verses for that if you want to see it. Sydney's probably going to correct me. Eretz Hasabi. Am I close? Okay. Eretz Hasabi. She's so nice to me. She said, that was really close, Dad. Eretz Hasabi. This is taken from the Ptolemies. Now, if I went back here so you looked at that. It was taken from the Ptolemies in a series of battle between a guy named Antiochus III, the father, and Ptolemy. So we got Antiochus right here. This is where he's coming from, and they've been battling here. So now these guys right here take this land away from them in one of these battles. So this is what he's talking about right here. So now when we say the host, it's obviously the people of God. When you see that word host, there's a host of heaven. Angels. It's God's people in whatever definition we're talking about. So a host of God's people here. Genesis 15:5 and 22:17. I'm trying to give you a couple of them if you want to look them up. Now this little horn here that we're talking about, he became a great persecutor of the people of Israel, the host of heaven. Okay, got it? He subjected that nation, and he trampled on them. Okay, that's true, historically true. Can we apply that to the Antichrist? Yeah, okay, all right, let's keep going. He set himself up as Israel's king, calling him the prince of the host. Okay, yeah, I can see the Antichrist doing the same thing. He even said, I'm the king of the world. You know, the prince. His name really is Prince of the Power of the Air even. So you can see another. Definitely this is Antiochus. No doubt. This is historically, factually, it happened. But it's a shadow of something in the future too. He compelled the nation, Israel, to worship him, and as suggested by the fact that he prohibited Israel from following her religious practices. He removed the daily sacrifice. Antiochus actually went in and said, that's it. No more sacrifices, no more praying in your temple, no more. Okay, follow with that. That's the same kind of thing the Antichrist is going to do. And he desecrated the temple. It says he brought the sanctuary low. He replaces the altar to Jehovah God that is inside the temple with an altar to, and I believe it was Zeus. Could have been Jupiter. These are 2 huge gods they had. He replaces it. Then he sacrifices a pig in there. And if we know anything about Jewish people and swine, that's not good. the nation of Israel, the saints, they went along with this guy's wishes because his rebellious attitude. He was in rebellion. Same thing Satan's in. Same thing Antichrist is in. This is what Antiochus did. He prospered, and so he despised the truth. Remember, at this point in time, Ptolemy was the one that gave the Jews the Greek Old Testament, because he was following what Alexander wanted them to do. We want you to continue doing the things that you do, your Jewishness and all that, but we want you to do it in Greek. So that's where we get our Septuagint version of the Bible. So this one now, years later, he goes in, he hates it. He hates anything to do with God. It's not about him. So he takes all the scripture, he says, nobody reads scripture. He even says, nobody circumcises their kids. This guy's going in and saying, that's it. If I see anything Jewish happen, I'm killing you. So, the part of the vision anticipated the rise of a ruler in the Greek Empire who subjugated the people of the land of Israel and desecrated her temple, interrupted her worship, and demanded for himself the authority and worship that belongs to God. So this dream here is refining and it's clarifying the control of the Seleucids. That's who this was. Back to that, the upper group there. And it's Antiochus. Antiochus the Fourth. Okay? So here's Antiochus the Fourth. 8th king of the Syrian dynasty. Infamous brother of Cleopatra. Not that Cleopatra. Ascended the throne following the murder of his brother, the former king, Seleucus Philopator. Okay, good. He's not even the rightful heir. He's not in the line. He kills his brother and takes it. Demetrius, the son of Seleucus, was the rightful heir to the throne. He still lived, but he got held as hostage in Rome. He goes and gets him arrested and locked up and taken away. And he ends up over in Rome. Now, Antiochus succeeded in obtaining the throne largely through flattery and bribery. Okay, we're going to see that in Daniel 11. We'll come up on that one. But so this guy came to power in 175 BC. Invaded Egypt, defeated Ptolemy, and then recalled from Egypt by Rome. He made Jerusalem a buffer state. He plundered and desecrated the temple. He called himself Epiphanes. That's where we get the Antiochus Epiphanes. What he saw in Epiphanes was the illustrious one. Can you imagine sticking that on the end of your name? Chris goes to work and he goes, I'm Chris the illustrious one. This guy had an ego. This guy was something. Well, here, the illustrious one. Can you see that? Honey, get me some coffee for the illustrious one. Yeah. Here's the funny thing about the language. You know how words are so close in some languages, you can say one thing, and if you don't say it just right, it ends up being something else. The Jews called him Epimanes. That's the madman. So and it was something that people would do, like the kids would run around and call him Antiochus Epiphanes, and obviously that probably didn't make him very happy. But so this guy, he's out there. All right, so we'll keep going here in 11. He even exalted himself as high as the prince of the host. Ooh. And by him the daily sacrifices were taken away, and the place of his sanctuary was cast down, capital H. Because of transgression, an army was given over to the horn to oppose the daily sacrifices, and he cast truth down to the ground. He did all of this and prospered. Now, this is, like I'm telling you, there's nothing really hard to take apart for this, because I'm telling you what Antiochus did. Factual, done. That's also a shadow here of what we're seeing from the Antichrist. Desolate the sanctuary. Here's a term that you've heard. Abomination of desolation. Jesus was talking to them. They came out of the temple, and when they came out, they go, look at all these blocks. Isn't this great? Look at this pretty place. Oh, look at this. Isn't this great? And he goes, not one stone will be left upon another. And they're like, whoa. The next question was, hey, tell us the signs of the end. Tell us the things that are going to... And he said, when you see the abomination of desolation happen. And so he goes through that story. Well, this, what you're reading right now, is what Jesus was referring to. And every prophecy summit, everything that we've talked about prophecy, this is right in the middle of it. Because the abomination of desolation is the thing that divides the tribulation period into two halves. There is the great tribulation. That's 3.5 years to the end. There is the tribulation. Not as bad as this, but not good. That's the first half. So if you read, when we go through Revelation on Sunday morning, you're going to find the mark of the beast is not something that was mandatory at first. There's a lot of things that weren't kicked into gear. Remember, he starts to come on the scene, and he's this really good guy. Is he going to be this 13th imam that's Muslim? Maybe. Is he going to be something else? Maybe. Who knows what he comes up as. But by 3.5 years in, he's exalted himself above everything that is even called God. So even if it is a Muslim thing and he's Allah, he's going to say, I'm over Allah. Allah's under me. This is where he sets himself up in the Holy of Holies. This is the reason why people say the temple has to be built. This is where you start getting the dividing line for people looking at the end times. Because they say, oh, well, the rapture can't happen. The temple's not built yet. I could imagine a crew of construction people putting up a temple in 3.5 years. So just because the temple's not built doesn't mean we can't go. It just means that the temple has to be built by the 3.5 year point. Because the 3.5 year point is when he goes inside it and sets up his stuff. This abomination of desolation is where we're at. And this is the dividing point, because this is what Antiochus did. And that basically sacrificing that pig is the same thing as this Antichrist of our time setting himself up in there. So he's a pig. I kind of like that. I think that's kind of cool. Okay, so here's another thing. You're going to notice, you're going to go, what is that? Maccabees chapter 1, verses 44 through 49. Does anybody have an idea what Maccabees is? You ever heard of it?
I have heard of it, but never really researched it.
Have you heard of it? The reason you guys heard of it was because it's Catholic. The reason you're going to find that in there is because the Catholic Bible, and I'm sure there's others, I shouldn't isolate them, but there are books in those Bibles that are very similar, best I can equate this, it's like the book of Enoch. It's not that those books are not accurate. It's that those books were not godly inspired. Why don't we have the book of Enoch in our Bible? Why don't we teach from the book of Enoch? I can show you 3 places in your Bible that's sitting there right in front of you where the brothers of Jesus quoted from the book of Enoch. So it's not that the book is not correct. It's that it wasn't anointed, it wasn't inspired, it wasn't supposed to be in this Bible. So it's not. Maccabees falls in that same vein. So you can look at it, Donna and I has always described it like this. Think of it as a journal of a very godly man. Not inspired, not perfect, but accurate. If nothing else, accurate for historical points. So here's this. Reading this, you'll kind of get a point why I threw it in there. And the king sent letters by messengers to Jerusalem and the cities of Judah. He directed them to follow customs strange to the land. What? Follow customs not Jewish? To forbid burnt offerings and sacrifices and drink offerings in the sanctuary. To profane the Sabbaths and feasts, to defile the sanctuary and the priests, to build altars in sacred precincts and shrines for idols, to sacrifice swine and unclean animals, and to leave their sons uncircumcised. They were to make themselves abominable by everything unclean and profane, so that they should forget the law and change all the ordinances. And whoever does not obey the command of the king shall die. That's a factual statement that was made about something that actually happened. I'll tell you who Maccabee was in a second. So this command that came from the king down to these people was very clear. We understand it. If all Scripture is given for doctrine, reproof, and correction, what do we get out of that? How many times do we see stuff change and we get really upset about it? We can't have prayer in school anymore? I can't believe they're going to do that. And then we get consumed with something else. And then we get used to it. And then we forget about it. And then the next thing comes along. Well, you're not going to do this either. Well, we're going to take in God we trust off the money. Well, we're going to... And every time it comes up, we get this righteous indignation. Well, I'm going to go show them. I'm going to go stand on a street corner with a sign. That's what I'm going to go do. And then you get tired. You go on about your business. And you forget. That's what this king was doing to the Jews. I don't care if you don't like it. I'm going to force feed this to you. And eventually, you'll just give up. I got you to convert from Greek to Hebrew. Believe it or not, at this time, if you read something that was Hebrew, it would be the equivalent of a Catholic person today reading Latin. Do we know anybody reading Latin? No. Well, that's what Hebrew was at this point. So he'd already gotten their language flushed. So now they were reading something Greek, and there's something, okay, we got it. But now he's trying to take them to a level. How many times do we do that? Even with this current president that we got now, he's done enough stuff to just light you on fire. Can you explain, if we're so upset about it, why 7 million people that call themselves God-fearing people didn't go vote in 12? This. So, Maccabee. What you're going to find here, and I'm probably going to run into it somewhere else, but I'll skip it when I get there if I didn't. When this started to happen, things would happen and they would kill him. And they started crouching in. Well, there was a high priest, and I don't have all the names. I wish I should have put them on there. But the high priest at the time, when they came over, we ran into, he was a Maccabee. That was his name. That's what he did. He had sons. Well, there's one called Judas Maccabee, and what that meant, his name meant the hammer. I kind of like that, the hammer. Well, it came down to where they go, that's it. We're going to start tearing these places down. We're going to start tearing these. And they go, you're going to be doing it over our dead body. So they came in and they go, fine, let's do it. We're going to kill you. These guys held them off. And they had gotten all the other people. So what I just said about this other stuff up here, what's happening to us, these guys said, enough. We've had it. You're not going to do this to us anymore. So they started fighting back. And they fought back, and they fought back, and they fought back, and it was years. And basically, they're fighting trained Greek soldiers. And these guys kept fighting, and they kept fighting, and these Maccabees, they were pushing it. They were pushing it. And they won. They got them pushed back. They took back control of Israel. And now, here they are, still under Ptolemy's control. I mean, that region right there. Still under that control. But they're worshiping God. To the day, and I forgot which day it was. I think it's December the 12th or December the 14th. It was December the 14th that this guy goes in and sacrifices this pig. To the day, they get that back and they purify it. I mean, no amount of Clorox could have gotten this out. There was ritual cleansing that had to be done. Well, when they did, the oil that was in the lamps, like in the menorah, that oil actually had a specific recipe. You just didn't go put certain oil in. You didn't go down to Turner's or something and buy it. So there was a recipe of it that was there. Well, it takes a certain amount of days for it to do it, to create and ferment or whatever it did. Now, they found a container, but they only had enough for one night. It would burn and it would be gone. So they prayed. And they said, God, let that light stay lit. And that light was lit for 8 days.
That's the same as the 3 girls.
It's what?
That's the same as the 3 angels or the 3 girls that had the oil, and only 2 of them didn't bring it.
10. The 10 virgins in Matthew. Yeah. Similar though. Yeah, similar oil. Matter of fact, I bet there's a connection there. This is Hanukkah. So when you see somebody say, oh, well, that's just, the Jewish Christmas. That's like saying it's Hitler's birthday and they're going to go celebrate it. That's ridiculous. So this is where they are celebrating getting that temple back, putting that oil inside there, and God miraculously keeping that thing lit for 8 days. And it all happened because Antiochus had gone in and done this, and then they got it back. Now, let me get away from that and go back over here to 13. You learn lots of useless items. 13, then I heard a holy one speaking, and another holy one said to that certain one who was speaking, how long will the vision be concerning the daily sacrifices and the transgression of desolation, the giving of both the sanctuary and the host to be trampled underfoot? Do you see that? The giving of? Is God in control? Yes, at all times. And he said to me, for 2,300 days, then the sanctuary shall be cleansed. The first thing I pick up, one saint speaking. Remember when John's wandering around there in heaven, and he says, and then one of the elders came and said something to me? It sounds like it's almost a mirror image, one saint speaking to me. Okay, so 2,300 days. You got to know that I dug, and I looked, and I could not find a single thing that fit. Here's something that is an interesting fact from history. Seventh-day Adventists, 1884, said that the second coming was going to happen. So what they did was, they took this 2,300 days and they did the day for a year interpretation and said, here's what we got. They took it as the sanctuary here was on earth. So they said 1843 is when this is going to happen. Well, obviously it didn't. 1844. No, that didn't happen either. So they kept going. They kept going. So when you look at this as 2,300 days, it's interesting because Seventh-day Adventism and the fact that we're right here is kind of interesting because we interact a lot with those guys. It grew out of the Second Great Advent Awakening, in which this verse was given the day-year interpretation. William Muller and his followers, among whom was Ellen G. White, understood the sanctuary to be the earth, which would be cleansed at his coming. The date for Christ's second coming was set for 1843. Miller was a sincere but badly mistaken Baptist preacher. Did you have any idea that the Seventh-day Adventists came out of the Baptists? So, badly mistaken Baptist preacher. The day and the year interpretation it's fragile, it's insecure. You can't really do anything with that because you're trying to use these theories and prophecy, and every time you do this, these date setters, it always comes up wrong. Because God said, no man knows the date or the hour. Harold Camping. We just saw that in a modern day, that you can't do that kind of stuff. So, if the 2,300 days here are taken to be literal 24-hour days, the period would be between 6 and 7 years. That approximates the time that Antiochus began to push all these atrocities on them. Okay, about 170, somewhere in there. 6 years were from Antiochus' first incursion into Jerusalem to the restoring of the temple by Judas Maccabee in late 164. Okay, but that's 6 years. That's not a little over. The one thing I've found out of anything I've dug up, God is exact. He's not approximate. So if it doesn't fit, don't force it. That don't work. The Jewish priest, Judas Maccabee, the hammer, drove out that Syrian army, which was Greek, at which time the temple was cleansed and rededicated after its pollution. I like the way they called that. It was pollution because they put that pig in there. This cleansing is what we're talking about, the Feast of Lights, Festival of Lights, Hanukkah. So evenings and mornings, Erev and Bokar. That's how they, you ever notice, when does Sabbath start? 6 at night. The evening, and it goes back to Genesis, because it says evening and morning was the first day. Evening and morning was the second day. Erev to Bokar. What it actually is talking about is confusion or darkness to light and clarity. Erev to Bokar. So that's how these guys do it. Well, 1150 days is 110 days short of 3.5 years exactly. Can't use that one either. It's short. So that ain't it either. So if it's not precise, don't use it. I mean, it's interesting, but you can't do anything with it. If anybody ever finds out what that is, tell me, because I'd love to find that out. That is not an erroneous number. That's in there for some reason. And if God's sending the stuff to us, we'll get it. And it'll have to be exact too. It can't be precise or approximate. So in 15, then it happened, when I, Daniel, had seen the vision and was seeking the meaning, that suddenly there stood before me one having the appearance of a man. And I heard a man's voice between the banks of the Ulai, who called out and said, Gabriel, make this man understand the vision. This is the first mention of an angel by name in the Bible. Actually, it's funny too, because Gabriel, Gabar is man and El is God. So it's an interesting spin. Having the appearance of a man, I thought was cool. So in 17, so he came near where I stood, and when he came, I was afraid, and I fell on my face. But he said to me, understand, son of man, that the vision refers to the time of the end. Now, as he was speaking with me, I was in a deep sleep with my face to the ground. But he touched me and stood me upright. Complete side note. When you see Son of Man, we've seen that called of Jesus, didn't we? That is just referring to human. Son of Man, it's human. So when you see that name being attached to Jesus, you know they're talking about his humanity when he was here. So here's this prophecy, and it's going on the immediate future, and now it's projected into the distant future. Antiochus is merely just a part of the other little horn. Who will come up at the end of times of the Gentiles? Remember, this last one that we're talking about is something that's going to come up at the end, our time, not Daniel's time. So now you're seeing them kind of merge together here. In 19, and he said, look, I'm making known to you what shall happen in the latter time of the indignation. For at the appointed time, the end shall be. God is very in charge. When the rapture happens, it's specific. When the 7 years is going, it's specific. When the 7 years ends, it's specific. That's why we can't know the day or the hour, because we don't have a timeline attached to it. If the rapture did not happen before the tribulation period, you could tell exactly when it was going to happen. If it was going to happen into the tribulation period, say it was like halfway. Well, I know the rapture is going to happen because he's sitting in the temple. Well, what if it was at the end? You could check the time. Jesus said, Jerusalem, Jerusalem, I wish you would have done this, but because you didn't recognize this thy day. They could have figured it out, just like that guy did. 173,880 days. Somebody like us could have been sitting there and saying, the Messiah will be here today. It's possible. They didn't live on that. We do. That rapture, no indicators of when at all. The ram which you saw having 2 horns, they are the kings of Mede and Persia. See what he's doing now? He's interpreting this. And the male goat is the kingdom of Greece. The large horn that is between its eyes is the first king. So Gabriel's moving from the local fulfillment of Antiochus to the end times. What were we talking about last week? Times of the Gentiles. This is what we're talking about. That's why this shifted to Hebrew now, because we're seeing how this times of the Gentiles is going to affect Hebrew, Israel. We don't have to speculate anymore. See, we can read this. The ram definitely represents the kings of Mede and Persia. Okay, so the rough goat is likewise labeled the king of Greece, and the great horn is the first king, Alexander the Great. Nobody argues about anything I've just said. I don't care which commentary you grab, who you're looking at, everything that they're looking at right here, they go, that's definitely it. 22. As for the broken horn, As for the broken horn and the four that stood up in its place, 4 kingdoms shall rise out of that nation, but not with its power. Those 4 together, it was essentially Greece, so why wasn't it just as strong? Because it didn't have a unified leader. They had 4 guys, knuckleheads. And in the latter time of their kingdom, when the transgressors have reached their fullness, a king shall arise having fierce features, who understands sinister schemes. That's Antiochus. Apply that to something today. When the Antichrist arrives, he will be a king that arises having fierce features who understands sinister schemes. That's what he's going to be doing. 24, his power shall be mighty, but not by his own power. He shall destroy fearfully. He shall prosper and thrive. He shall destroy the mighty and also the holy people. The Jews? Who did Antiochus wipe out? Jews. In the tribulation period, who is the Antichrist going after? The Jews. He's not going after the church because the church is not here. Jesus said, "Who do you guys say that I am?" And Peter says, "You're the Messiah." And he says, "On this rock I will build my church, and the gates of hell will not prevail." If that scripture was about us, he wouldn't have said the gates of hell will not prevail, because it just says that he will destroy the mighty and also the holy people. It's not us in the tribulation period, but it's the Jews, because this is a shadow of what's going to happen. Look at this one. Revelation 13:7. "And it was given unto him to make war with the saints, and to overcome them, and to power was given to him over all kindreds and tongues and nations." Well, wait a minute, that says saints. Aren't we saints? Well, that means one thing. All saints are not the same. There's Old Testament saints, there's church age saints, there's tribulation saints. There will be millennium age saints. And they're all going to be operating differently. The only thing that saint means is that we're a follower of God. Not necessarily in the time. Today, this stuff, that can't happen to us. Because Jesus said the gates of hell cannot prevail against you. He said, "I gave you this authority." He said, "I want you to go out into the world as if you were me." That's what that means, in my name. As if you were me, go out and do that. Well, how come it doesn't apply here? Because it's a different world. And it says that power was given him over... Who's the only one that has power? And he gave him power for a purpose. There was a reason, just like he did here. 25. "Though his cunning, he shall cause deceit to prosper under his rule." He's lying. "And he shall exalt himself in his heart." He's puffed up. What is he, Clive? The Antichrist? He's delusional.
Delusional.
He's delusional in his heart. "He shall destroy many in their prosperity." That's an interesting verse. Sounds like Laodicea. "He shall even rise against the prince of princes, but he shall be broken without human means." Exactly. So we see what's happening here. Remember in the story that we saw with the statue, what took the statue down? The rock cut without hands. God did it and smashed it. In the tribulation period, what happens to the Antichrist? It says God picks him and the false prophet up, and they drop them right into the lake of fire. Not human. Humans don't beat this. Okay? So, here we go. This is a type of the Antichrist. "He will cause craft to prosper in his hand." That craft is King James. "No man will be able to buy or sell except the one who has the mark of the beast." Me and Donna were chatting about this over breakfast. I'm just going to throw it out there. I'd love to hear what somebody says some other time, but if there is not one sin that you could ever do that Jesus' blood did not cover, what is the mark of the beast? Because once you take it, you're done. Chew on that.
Chew on it?
Chew on it. See, breakfast, get it? Chew on it. "He shall magnify himself in his heart." Yeah, he's delusional. "He is given a mouth speaking great blasphemies." Remember what we were reading before? Last week? mouth, one of the horns, speaking great blasphemies. Yak, yak, yak. With power to continue 42 months, Revelation 13:5 says. What's 42 months? 3.5 years. The Holy Spirit did everything except break it down into days. No, he did days. He did everything except break it down into hours and minutes. By peace he shall destroy many. If you don't think that the church is going to go through what the body of Christ has gone through for the past 1900 years, you're missing it. We live in an incredibly comfortable time, even today, with all of the complaining that we might do with what's going on, we're comfortable. Think back to some of the persecutions that the church has gone through over the past 1900 years, and we'll be apologizing to God for even thinking it. I know that people figure that we're on some kind of a timeline. These rapturitis people will go along and they go, we're going to get raptured out and then things decline. Don't make that mistake. The world is in a decline now, and I don't believe it's some straight line. I believe it's a curve where it's dropping off a cliff. The rapture will be at the fullness of time. If he waited one more bit, we would be destroyed. We will see that. You notice I said it ain't going to attack us or affect us because we know where we stand. The gates of hell will not prevail. But don't think, oh, it'll be wonderful, we'll get taken out, and then it'll hit the fan. No. It's hitting the fan progressively, and just like that frog in the blender, just like that verse we're reading from Maccabees, people get used to it. You have to get to the point where you go, it's happening now. But do it without this fatalist, oh my gosh, go stick my head in the sand, we're going to die. Because we're not. We're taken care of. Do what we got to do. Understand, just like he said, wow, it's going to rain. Get an umbrella. Know what we're doing. Know what's happening. And know that as it starts getting crazy, if in fact they remove cash, if in fact they try to take our guns, if in fact they do all these things that we hear people talking about, will it get better or worse? Worse. What does that mean? We're closer. That's why he says rejoice when you see these things starting to happen, because we're getting ready to go home. This is a split in time like Jesus showing up in 0. Jesus split time in half, BC AD. This rapture that we're talking about is something that is going to usher in the great and terrible day of the Lord. When you see this thing getting worse and worse and worse and worse, protect yourself. Do whatever you think is necessary to prepare, whatever, because it's going to get bad to a certain extent. Don't be stupid. Don't just go, oh, God will take care of me. I'm not going to go grocery shopping. Come on, that's, duh. But don't become a nut, because you need to understand, God's going to take care of me. And the worse it gets, the bigger your smile ought to be. We're going home. And it should even take you to a point to where the little things in life that tweak you and tick you off and cause you to be upset and be all consumed, those things should disappear. Because they mean nothing. They mean absolutely nothing. The stuff that is happening, if you're in the middle of buying a house, buy one. If you're buying a car, buy one. But understand, it's just stuff that's here. Enjoy it for whatever purpose it is here. But understand, we're going home, man. This kind of stuff is just, yeah, whatever. Well, there were a group called the Millers who sold everything or did whatever they did. They put on white sheets and stood on a hill. A couple days out there, they came back and said, can I get my stuff back? Because I was wrong. Oops, my bad. I think they said, sorry, Doug, my bad.
Does 3 and 4 have a verse that goes with the chapters on the end of that? Revelation 6 what and Revelation 13?
Not necessarily, because the entire verse is connected to it. Yeah, the plant's in the way. No, I can tell you that I don't see a letter there. So it's Revelation 6 and Revelation 13. So, all right, so let's go to this next one here. Here's a summary of what we just did. Okay, this was only Daniel chapter 8, okay? That's what we're looking at, Daniel chapter 8. Here's the summary. He will achieve great power by subduing others. He will rise to power by promising false security. Boy, we hear that already. He will be intelligent and persuasive with a teleprompter. He will be controlled by another delusional Satan. He will be an adversary of Israel and subjugate Israel to his authority. He will rise up in opposition to the Prince of Princes. Who's that? The Lord Jesus Christ. His rule will be terminated by divine judgment, God says, I'll take care of this one. Okay? Now, I'm going to give you these, and if you want copies, I'll email them to you, but we ain't going through all of them. Old Testament allusions to the Antichrist. Okay? There are 33 in the Old Testament, and there are 13 in the New Testament. Okay? That's huge. Now, here's the funny thing. Those are the ones in the Old Testament, right? If I go here, you see those? Where did those come from? Daniel, Daniel, Daniel. Well, that one says Zechariah. Yeah, there's a couple, I guess, I highlighted incorrectly, but a lot of them are from Daniel. So when we see things like this, when you get this kind of a sheet, when you guys hear me say he's an Assyrian, that's what it says. I'm not just making this up because I'm speculating. There's a verse that says it. So when you go through this, you even get to, there's one down here. If you read this one, Idle Shepherd from Zechariah 11:6, there's only 2 verses. That is the only physical description of the Antichrist in the Bible. And it says that his right hand is withered and his right eye is clean dried up. That's what it says. So, do you think that that's possible? Why it says that they take a mark on their where? Right? And? Which hand? And if it was the eye, so is it possible that where they're taking this mark is an allegiance because of what we saw from that? There's the New Testament ones. And like I said, I'll email them if you want. Okay, here we go, last 2 verses. 26. And the vision of the evenings and mornings. See, Erev and Boker? Evening came first. And the vision of the evenings and morning, which was told, is true. Therefore, seal up the vision, for it refers to many days in the future. And I, Daniel, fainted and was sick for days. Afterward, I arose and I went about the king's business. I was astonished by the vision, but no one understood it. You think God's not going to give you a message that'll turn your stomach? And that's how he said it. And he goes, oh, it's true. It's true. All right, so next week, the most amazing passage in the entire Bible. Proof that Jesus is indeed the Messiah. The passage that Jesus himself referenced as a key to end times prophecy next week. Chapter 9.